Hey everyone, Camille Whitestern here, reporting back for duty. In today's episode of Checked In with Splash, I get to sit down with an absolute powerhouse marketing leader. She's an incredible mentor to me and truly just an event marketing industry expert. We've got none other than Splash's very own Chief Marketing Officer, Kate Hammitt. We'll introduce her in a second. But in today's episode, let's set the stage. We're going to be digging into the major findings and really kind of a deeper analysis of our 2023 Outlook of Events report, insights from which we've uncovered from surveying literally hundreds of marketing and event professionals. So, just for quick background, every year we survey event professionals around the world and ask them to weigh in on everything from the importance of branding and keeping up with today's buyers to event formats, budgets, event tech, you name it. And their collective answers really shed a helpful spotlight on the key trends in event marketing and really give us and our community valuable insights into what's trending, what's working, what's not, and what's giving them grief. So I'm so excited to dig into their answers with Kate today. Let's go ahead and get checked in. Kate, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. This is honestly long overdue, and I'm really eager to dive in with you today. But first, how are you? And are you ready to get started?
I'm so ready. I thought you were going to introduce me as a friend of the pod too,
Oh,
because
I mean,
I'm,
obviously.
a diehard fan. So I'm excited for my checked in debut.
This is a momentous occasion, and as I said, long overdue. But I want to make the most of your time. I know your time is precious, and really just get into it for our listeners. So I'm going to back up a little bit for them and just set the stage a little bit more. So in January, we addressed the top three challenges that our community shared they were facing when it comes to just navigating the landscape of event marketing today. We did this in a really fun roundtable. And sidebar, if you couldn't join that roundtable in January or the one we recently did in February, definitely check those out. Tackling your biggest event challenges or fueling revenue growth through branded events are highly relevant to our conversation today. So we're going to link the on-demand recordings for those virtual roundtables in our show notes. Today, we're going to use our time, as I said, to really just dig into some of the topics we explored in those discussions, but really centering our conversation on the insights that you, Kate, found most compelling from the Outlook report. And I want to just dive into my first question for you, which is really unpacking like what were the challenges that event practitioners reported in their survey responses and what was your personal take on all of that.
Yeah, great question. So I will say, just to kick it off, I mean, you know, event marketers are very similar to all marketers, and we are always challenged, I feel like, by the same kind of core elements that we saw come through in the survey. Obviously, in a macroeconomic environment that we're going through today, some there's more strain than there is during years where there are fewer external factors involved.
Right.
But we did see, and this also aligns with a lot of the anecdotes we hear from our community, not enough human resources, tremendous budget constraints, and one factor that I think is getting larger and larger every year, just given the you know technology stack getting larger and larger every year, is the need for better technology or technology to work in a different way to really elevate, the process, the outcomes that event marketers and really all marketers are experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
So doing more with less, as we hear, from us at Splash,
Yeah.
from probably anything that you're ingesting from, a business professional point of view, doing more with less with a clunky tech stack is really what we're hearing, from the market at large.
Yeah. I can definitely relate as, I am a member of the community. I was technically a member of the community even before I joined Splash. And that is so real. When I think about and it's funny, I was just saying this to our CEO the other day. Sometimes I think I take for granted um, how lucky I am to just work at Splash because I just have access to the technology that I need. Splash, of course, but the other elements of kind of like the Mar tech stack that work with Splash and allow me to, like you said, Kate, do more with less, and really like just reap the benefits of modern technology. Um, I when I was kind of like looking through survey responses and digesting what we're seeing in this report, it was eye opening to me. Just to kind of take stock for a second and think about the real pain points. These are really gnarly challenges that we're talking about. So I'm wondering like what if we can kind of unpack a little bit more what where those pain points are actually coming from when you mention the event tech challenges.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I think those like the top 3 that we mentioned, the human component, the budget component, the tech stack component, that makes up almost 70% of the biggest challenge bucket. But then
Hmm.
you get into what the outcomes are from having, those 3 elements at play. We had other, responses around like lack of training or inability to, put best event practices in play. I think that ties back to, your technology
Hmm.
challenges just generally. And it is nice to work at Splash because we remove at least one thing, that
Right.
we feel like is run smoothly, but we understand, technology challenges and making your stack work and have that experience, and that challenge as marketers and as an organization. Um, the other things that we saw from the Outlook of Events survey were collaboration, project management. How do you really
Mm,
unify departments and team revenue? Again, we hear that in our community. um, then delivering on expected outcomes on time or on budget, um, and measuring results. Those are
right.
all things that I think ultimately like tie into that technology piece,
Yeah.
all of them, but they're all related. It's hard to measure results when you don't have the technology that facilitates that visibility into the data. It's hard to collaborate or manage when you have a ton of different systems and silos,
Hmm.
and the ability to kind of share data visibility from there. So I think we see that technology challenge permeate into the other responses. They're all related, very much so.
Okay, Kate. So we've kind of outlined these big challenges, and I'm wondering, what's happening when we think about outcomes, and what are people really driving towards, and what's potentially in the way of them achieving success?
Mhm. Yeah. So when we surveyed these event marketers, we positioned, what are your biggest challenges? And then we started to unpack um, what the outcomes were that they were charging after, which
Hmm.
revealed challenges related to achieving those outcomes that were separate in many ways from just your natural, roles and responsibility challenges like budget, you know, uh, process, technology, those sorts of things.
Hmm.
So it was interesting to see that when we started to talk about outcomes, nearly a quarter of the respondents said that they're measuring event success based on attendance, and nearly 2/3 reported that attendance was one of the most important metrics to the business.
Hmm.
So, ultimately, 1/3 was saying that attracting the right attendees was gonna be their biggest challenge in 2023. And we hear that a lot, and we
Yeah.
think about that a lot, obviously, as event marketers ourselves, and then from our community, getting the revenue in the room, the right attendees. How are you reaching
Right.
out? How are you engaging? What's your event mix? What does that look like? And I think that's evolving quite rapidly over the past certainly 5 years as we've introduced virtual, as hybrid has become, embraced by the community, um, and as we think about what the place is for in real life events and those
Hmm.
modalities and the impact that they've had. And then, the mix, we also think about, formats from a size perspective. What's the intimacy of your event?
Yeah.
We talk a lot about everyday events, and defined that in our report. That's, our, area of expertise, that repeatable, scalable event. So we can spend some time defining that for our listeners if you think that would be
Yeah. Would love to. I would love to dig into that. I think, especially because we get that question. We've been talking about it, and I think, you know, I would love to define that for our
helpful.
listeners, just to paint a clear picture and honestly inspire them to think about how they can start to leverage everyday events if they're not already. Although we do have some, I think we have some data on that, that maybe we can share.
We have
It's
a little bit of data on everyday events. So,
yeah. And I think it's important to acknowledge, like, we're talking about everyday events because we see that it's working. It's a format that works, especially in this climate, in this landscape. But I would, maybe we can dig into defining everyday events and then talk a little bit more about how, if we've seen any trends from the respondents' answers in terms of how they're approaching their marketing mix and kind of trying to find that sweet spot for their business.
mhm. Yep. So, in previous years, events were events, and we didn't differentiate between, if you were, an event manager and our event marketer, was that a workshop, were that networking panels, road shows, community events, or was that a large annual conference that you were
Hmm.
conducting every year? There was no real differentiation there. So, what we've set out to do is really define the everyday event versus flagpole events. So, the everyday event being, an experience that's specifically designed to be replicated and scaled either across regions, verticals, in different formats. That's your, virtual, hybrid, in person, and
Hmm.
across stakeholders. So everyday events would be the, experiences and interactions that would create a measurable impact on an audience. But I like to sort of compare it to flagpole events as not, you don't need to put your feet up and take a personal moment after that
Yeah.
event to recover from, the 3 days of intense networking, knowledge sharing, thought leadership, etc.
Right.
It's something that you can be doing on a consistent basis, that allows for all the benefits of events with, as we see it and as I see it, not the cost implications, the environmental implications, the opportunity cost to the audience, and
Right.
all those factors that go into that mega large event that you're doing on an annual basis. So that's where we see the definition. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a super helpful breakdown. And um, really glad that you just kind of articulated some of the reasons why you might want to really consider everyday events as part of your strategy if you haven't, because for all of the things that you just said, which, by the way, a lot of those are tied to the biggest challenges, right, that we just talked about: budget, when and this is, we've seen this in the respondents from the survey, but also I hear it anecdotally all the time just by connecting with people in our community, just asking them, hey, what are you planning this year? How are you thinking about your strategy? And without planting any seeds at all, just the overwhelming response has been, we're doing smaller events that we can repeat or scale more easily, because it's easier, it's more friendly on the budget in terms of executing. When you think about, like, all of the different people that likely are involved at a company. Maybe there's only one person or a small team of people responsible technically for events, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other stakeholders contributing. Um, and and you know, and then, as you said, Kate, I think the opportunity cost to the attendee is also something that um, I'm glad people are starting to consider more. It is not um, inherently uh, easy for attendees to commit to investing in your event, whether they have to invest their time, their money, they have to, if there's any travel involved. So the barrier to, yeah, the barrier to entry basically and is much lower when you think about all of the kind of value adds that you just spoke to when from everyday events. It's easier to get, it's easier to execute them, it's easier to get attendees to show up,
Mhm.
and then you can do more of them. The other point that I think is really important to double underline here is the attendee cost, right? Getting people to show up, which, as you just mentioned, Kate, that is, so many of the marketers in our community and who responded to this survey shared that, as you said, getting the right attendees in the room, attendance is a key metric of success for events. So when I think about how can I, ensure that I'm going to have great attendance rates at my events and it all makes sense for me, and the outcomes that I'm looking to drive, it's much easier for an attendee to commit to showing up to a more everyday sort of event. Probably going to require less time of them, less money if they have to pay for any travel to get to your tent pole or flagship event, even if it's just, paying for childcare for a day or a couple of days. These are all factors that could potentially, um, you know, detract someone or discourage someone from showing up, and then you're really not setting yourself up to actually hit your goals of your event at the end of the day. um, I would love to just hear more thoughts from you, Kate, on really how you would encourage marketers to think about leveraging everyday events in terms of just also architecting that engagement with their audience 365 days a year outside. I know we've talked about this a lot, but we see the importance, and I would love for you to just explain from your perspective why everyday events are so powerful in the landscape today of
Mhm.
connecting with your community members or your buyers or your consumers, whatever type of business you're running, B2B, B2C. I think we can all agree that, you know, consistent engagement is just table stakes right now for business success.
Yeah, I mean, it's a noisy world out there for everybody, personally, professionally, we're all human. So when we think about everyday events really working for pipeline velocity and those things that we need to generate growth for our organizations, w- we look at everyday events as a way to create that impactful brand experience again and again as you deliver a buyer through typically a non-linear journey now,
Mm-hmm.
um, to ultimately engaging as a partner, or getting under contract. So when if it takes 30 touch points from initial awareness through the pipeline on average, at least in B2B, how are you generating that impact? It
Right.
isn't typically, through a content asset or, a phone call. It's that experience that is super personalized.
Mm-hmm.
Very hard to personalize a generic tentpole experience. It needs to be frequent enough for the buyer to start to get stickiness within your brand. So that frequency of every day is essential there, and it needs to be buyer led. It needs to be work for the buyer as opposed to just work for this linear seller-led journey that, the marketing playbooks are pivoting from. And I think that ability to customize, personalize, and have that experience at a specific cadence so the buyer can get engaged with, your brand, better understand your organization, and not rely on just one big opportunity once a year for 3 days for a buyer or prospect to, understand what type of partnership is available to them. It's really in that everyday, top of mind opportunity to start to get your foot in the door.
Um, Kate, I think that so we're talking about this non-linear journey that we somehow have to figure out how to architect in an incredibly thoughtful way without necessarily being able to predict, you know, Susan is going to, register for this event and then download the report that you sent post event and then sign up for the community and then request a demo. It's not easy to predict the next steps in the journey for an individual buyer. So, how do we navigate that? What can we do to kind of work through that particular challenge?
Yeah, and I think it's something that's top of mind for marketers everywhere is this dance between brand and lead generation. And there was a period of time where brand marketing was considered, the fluffier stuff, and the hard hitting marketing was the demand generation, the lead generation. And I feel like we've come back to finally achieve a balance and an understanding that these two elements of demand creation and demand capture are both essential,
Hmm.
and really facilitated very nicely by events and figuring out your event mix related to to that purpose. Are you looking to amplify the brand that you have, share thought leadership, ultimately help define your category further, create demand, for your organization? Or are you looking to, bring someone further down the pipeline? We see a lot of like customer events, expansion, closer down to the bottom of the funnel,
Hmm.
VIP type of events where you're looking to, really close that deal. So I think it's an interesting way to think about, strategy and think about your event mix. Ultimately, trying to figure out how you can use events to really drive that brand awareness, and then allow for that nonlinear buyer journey to take place, take hold, and then capture at the right time, that contact that is in market, but you've already done all that work from a brand awareness perspective,
Hmm.
related to your events on a frequent basis and been top of mind and been in the category. And so events from those two lenses, I think, serve a really great purpose. You have to understand, who you're trying to target, but I think that's where it brings it all around to the event mix and ultimately how you're understanding, demand capture and demand creation
Yeah.
related to events.
Yeah. And what are how does personalization come into play here? Because I feel like personalization was a very buzzy marketing word. I mean, everything was meant to be personalized, and we have the capabilities now to really accomplish that in many different channels. And I'm wondering, like, what are your thoughts on personalization, especially as we think about, you know a cookieless marketing future, and the opportunity that events play to allow you to accomplish that personalization, kind of at scale. What are your thoughts there? What would be your advice for marketers who are trying to, I guess going back to my kind of initial question in here is, how do you architect that cohesive journey for the masses, but then also like personally for individuals?
Yeah. I mean, you need to know your market and earn their trust. It's very,
Hmm.
kind of comes down to a very simple challenge that we're going to have as marketers in a cookieless future. We're going to need to earn that engagement. We're going to need to present valuable information. So, our target audience wants to engage. They're going to engage more if they find it valuable. We're going to have to earn it. And events that are personalized are going to allow for that progressive profiling. So you're going to get to know your market on a much deeper level, as opposed to going to a data set that's probably old anyway,
Right.
and trying to do the work that way to get to know your market. So it's something that, I think ultimately comes down to good marketing. And I think a lot of people have been doing that already. So those best practices that, I think some marketing teams have been ignoring, they're going to need to really double down and focus on, what matters to their ICP, and,
Hmm.
set themselves up for success by being able to progressively profile that audience and deliver them an experience that keeps them going, keeps them
Hmm.
progressing, and ultimately get that first party data for themselves.
Yeah. I feel like, this also applies to ABM strategy as well, which we're seeing a lot of people lean into. And I think, you know, I think it makes sense to consider events as kind of a central part of that ABM strategy because of the data that you can collect, the way that you can personalize, and also um, but also scale, right? Like with ABM, you need to be like, ideally you want
Mhm,
to be able to like scale, right? So it's
mhm.
not truly like a one to one necessarily. You can eventually get to that like one to many. Okay, so Kate, I think we should dive deeper into the buyer journey and how that has really evolved. Um, can you walk me through from your perspective what are we seeing today that marketers, our listeners especially, really
Mm.
need to be aware of so that they can move smarter instead of, and work smarter, not harder, and as we love to say, actually do more with less. What do they need to be thinking about in order to do that?
Yeah, so, a lot of evolution has occurred and is on the horizon. So where we are today, we've moved from, of course, the office phone and cold calls and researching on Google and exchanging your information, into a world where we're screening phones, remote
Hmm.
lifestyle, dark social era where, I'm reaching out on my networks to try to get recommendations, and attribution is tough in that environment. We were working on self-reported and piecing that together with, what our software is saying, and we're getting research that B2B buyers don't, want to be sales led. They want to, ultimately be anonymous, be independent, figure out
Right.
their own buying journey, and then moving it forward. So that's where we are. And as marketing always is, ever evolving. So we're going from, that lead based mentality into account based and lead based, ultimately trying to get to a situation where instead of, you know generic mass marketing, we're truly getting personalized. We're truly thinking right person, right time, looking at intent data, pulling in, AI as opposed to manually scoring our leads or our
Hmm.
accounts. Um, and some of from a collaboration, like an internal processy perspective, marketing is no longer handing things off to sales.
Right.
It's a mentality of team revenue. It's a collaboration. We're getting away from just, email based outreach to a multi-channel, customized, adaptive opportunity
Mhm.
where the buyer is leading the way. So it's very cool in the sense that marketing best practices and how we operate uh, now has to be up leveled again, which is
Totally.
very cool. But I think that's where when we talk about the experiences that we can deliver, the intimacy, the knowledge share, all of that really needs to be as refined as the other elements of our, multi-channel adaptive buyer-led journey is. And I think that that's where we have a great example, to follow and to really take experiential moments and bring those into this new paradigm and honestly like the modern marketing playbook. So what I hear in the community, what we're, working on at Splash, and what our challenges are is to, you know, make sure that our playbooks are modernized and we are moving forward, in this
Yeah.
way by delivering these experiences, and helping our clients do that as well.
Yeah. The 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 one team revenue is so game changer, and I see a lot of other people, as you said, in our community talking about how can they achieve that. There it's the perpetual, how do you get that marketing sales alignment,
Mhm,
really everyone rowing in the same direction. um and I agree with you too that it actually is an exciting time. There's so much opportunity, there's so many areas of opportunity for, as you said, for marketing teams and professionals to really up level, to really um, deliver incredible experiences with the same rigor, as you were kind of speaking to, as you would approach other marketing functions. um, so I'm wondering, Kate, if there's any other really compelling or interesting insights from our outlook of events report, or just your own findings,
mhm.
that we can share to just further equip our listeners to be able to navigate these trying times.
Mhm.
It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, and I think as much as we can, really share, as you were speaking to, best practices, but also ways for people to kind of rethink their strategy. When I think of best practices, I think like kind of like brass tacks, like what are the actual tactics, and that's very important. We need to get that granular, and I also want to just make sure we've kind of covered all of our bases for and kind of can serve as like the lighthouse for our community. Like what else are we seeing on the horizon? So if there's anything else that you wanted to share with our listeners for today.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's on the horizon is, just some really inevitable challenges that we're gonna need to overcome, related to compliance across the organization. How do you
Mm,
make sure that, your brand equity and integrity is upheld throughout the organization? There are a lot of events that are going on at some of our larger enterprises.
yeah,
So making sure that compliance, and that's everything from, what your logo looks like to GDPR, and obviously some of the mandates that we have, as organizations, to the legal policies, to the
right.
T&E policies. Compliance means many, many things across the enterprise. So those requirements are not going away. And in fact, they're getting more complex. So understanding as a broader organization that even though you might be an event marketer in marketing, think about how many other events are in the organization are going on in the organization, either to customers, to partners, to
Mhm.
prospects. Think about all your stakeholders. Think about all the ways that your brand is being presented, and try to, you know, harness the power of that brand and make sure that, it's being portrayed appropriately and effectively in every single piece, starting with the recruiting process, all the way through to, an engineering user group that might be conducted. So as event marketers and event professionals, reaching out to make sure that, the enterprise is upholding the brand, because
Mhm.
that really permeates the minds of your buyer, but all stakeholders in the industry itself.
Yeah. That's huge. That is huge, especially because there's there's really no room for brand dilution. There's we can't afford to
Mhm.
allow that to happen in any channel, really, internally, as you're saying, especially externally. um I'm so glad that you brought that up as something to be mindful of, that's, not going away, as you said, and likely only going to become more important to nail
Mhm.
and get right.
Mhm. Definitely. And I think that, being able to harness the brand lends itself to, amplifying the brand within the community, within
Hmm.
dark social, getting your referrals in order. Those are really the methods you know, to really bring in more pipeline. So today, as we talked about earlier, so I think that's it's becoming even more important, to not think of your buyer journey in a silo, or your brand in a silo. Um,
Yeah. Well, this has been really great, Kate. Thank you so much. I want to be mindful of our time, but we might have to bring you on for a part two. We will definitely be bringing you back to the podcast very soon. And if there are any other insights that we didn't get to dig into today from the Outlook of Events report, we'll bring you back for a part two. I want to thank you so much for joining me today and unpacking the biggest challenges and also just what we're seeing on the horizon for marketing and event professionals, and also sharing some tactics and strategies that our listeners can start to consider deploying in their own event programs. um, Thank you so much. Especially thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We'll have a bunch of different things linked in the show notes for you relevant to today's conversation. So definitely be sure to check those out. If you're a fan of the show, please subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Give us a rating if you'd like. And maybe best of all, share this with someone in your own life, in your own community, who would find value from learning with us here as a community. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't joined our Slack community, we'll make sure the link for that is also in the show notes. It's an amazing place to go where you can connect with peers in your industry, ask questions, share ideas or source ideas, and just find belonging in a community of marketing and event rock stars just like you. So, Kate, thank you again so much. This has been so fun. And until next time, everyone, take care.